he submitted a letter. Oh, thank you. We do have some public comment. I want to recognize Jeff Mills. He submitted a letter with respect to the Pittock Gate. Jeff, you've got 2 minutes for public comment. Floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. In the letter, basically, I state that the gate that is on the, let's just say, the west side, or excuse me, the east side of Pittock Mansion is almost always blocked. And so when there are issues with road closures, ice storms, potential threat of fire, any of the things that are going on up in that area, there is no alternative method of being able to leave our neighborhood. And for some reason, that gate seems to always be closed, even when reaching out on trying to get the gate open. It seems that it is almost never opened, maybe a couple times. It does pose a risk in extreme weather events. And obviously, as you know, we're having more and more of these all of the time. And so I would just request consideration for either changing policy of gate closures and openings being in line with that of the main gate, which is on the west side off of Pittock Avenue, or being able to provide more members of either the community or the Park Service or whatever that may be with access to a gate key in those instances, or just ensuring anytime there is a closure, there is snowstorm, anything of that nature, opening up that gate to making sure that people have a means of being able to leave in event of a crisis, because going down Burnside in our current path is nearly impossible in snow and ice storms.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the comments. And unfortunately, the Parks Board doesn't have anything to do with the gate closures itself, but we could certainly connect through through Director Long or Assistant Deputy Director Lofgren, who can probably put you in touch with the correct people to see if that might be a possibility. I don't know if Director Long or Deputy Director Lofgren have any comments about how they might be able to help navigate that request.
My understanding is that Park Security is aware of this, aware of this gate being closed. So we would just have to do a little investigation to understand what the impacts would be and what the concerns are with regards to having folks outside of the city have access to the gate. So
yeah, in I guess one question,
and I can get back to you, Mr. Mills,
okay,
on that. I really don't like I
no,
got your
totally understand.
I got your letter last week, and I've been at a conference since Sunday, so I haven't been able to do any investigation on it.
Yep, no worries whatsoever. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff, for bringing it to our attention. We'll see if we can get staff, get you in touch with the right staff to see if we can come to a good resolution for you. But thank you for bringing it to our attention. Really appreciate it.
Very much. All right.
I wanted to verify there isn't any other public comment. I see a name here that I don't recognize, and I wanted to see if it's a person who wanted to offer any public comment, even though I don't think we received any other requests for public comment. Darrell Singleton.
Oh, he's with
Yes.
Recreation.
Oh,
They're in place of Maximo, who's out today.
I can't hear you, but it sounds like staff.
He's with
knows.
Recreation. Maximo is
Oh.
out today. so
Oh,
Darrell is
terrific. You're
in his
here in Maximo's stead. Great.
Yes.
Nice to meet you, Darrell.
You too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, with that, are there any general announcements from the floor? Corbin.
I just want to thank staff for changing the agenda around and adding some of the updates that I was requesting last time we met. So I really appreciate the new format. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Corbin, for the comments. Thank you, Michelle, for accommodating those revisions. Really appreciate that. Any other general announcements from the floor? With that, we'll move on to approving our October meeting minutes. I hope everybody had a chance to review them. At this time, did anyone have any comments, questions, or clarifications on the minutes? If not, I will entertain a motion from the floor to approve the minutes as submitted.
So moved.
Thanks, Mike. Any second?
I
I'll
second.
second.
A race between Corbin and Paul. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? See a bunch of hands. Any opposition?
I'm abstaining.
Because you weren't there. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you. With that, we'll move to the director's report, which was submitted to the board. I hope folks had a chance to take a look at it. Are we doing Q&A only, or are we doing a written report, Adina or Todd?
Q&A.
You have 10 minutes, so
Yeah, no, I think that we were going to do a report and then
Okay.
just do Q&A. So, but we have a really meaty and interesting agenda tonight. So I'll keep my report out short. I'm going to touch on Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, Parks Levy Annual Report, and the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. If you haven't already, please read the Bureau Monthly Report. It's a nice 12-page read. And also I've been forwarding the Pay Dirt employee newsletter to the Parks Board. Just trying to send that in advance as well. It's a really good tool to kind of stay on top of things that are going on in the Bureau. So I'll also point out that upcoming City Council items and Bureau event links were included at the end of the agenda. So folks can take a look at that. As you all know, well aware that Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland is going to allow us to build a strategic framework that ties what the Bureau does and how we spend money to tangible outcomes for the community and to our purpose as an organization. Over the last 2 months, the project team and division managers have held 2 work sessions where we prioritized and refined outcome measures and reviewed each division's prioritized actions for measure development. Work on actions and outcome measures will be finalized by the end of this month. The mission, vision, values, and racial equity statement co-design team is reconvening in December to learn what community said during the Wave 2 listening and learning, and then to revise the Bureau's foundational statements. The board can expect a Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland update, including the Wave 2 listening and learning report and mission, vision, value, and racial equity statement process at the December 13th board meeting. So I just wanted to level set there. And then at the January meeting, we'll ask Erin, who served on the MVVR team, to provide an update, and we can expect to finalize the Bureau statements by February. So we look forward to sharing where we're at and getting some feedback on the draft. I wanted to note that on October 26th, City Council unanimously voted to accept the 2021-22 Parks Levy Annual Report and the Parks Levy Oversight Committee Annual Report, which I'm sure Paul will touch on, or maybe not. We shared those reports by email to the Parks Board, and they're also posted electronically on the city's website if anybody wants to take a look at them. We printed a small batch of hard copy reports as well, and they're very good looking. So if anyone really wants a copy, let me know. Staff also provided an update on the Parks Levy Annual Report with a focus on financial reporting, both at the FSWIG, Financial Sustainability Working Group in October. And then I just wanted to touch on the PSEF Benefits Fund. Portland City Council approved amendments to City Code to restructure the PSEF Fund. And this new legislation will enable PSEF to make investors at a greater scale. The revenue is more than doubled than what they anticipated. And so we're really excited about that. They're going to propose near-term PSEF community investments include $40 million for Urban Tree Canopy and $30 million for resilient community centers. The second one is for both government and nonprofit owned community centers. So we've begun discussions with the Bureau of Planning Sustainability and PSEF about how we can partner with them and the community to leverage these investments. So as we work out details and have something to share with the board, we'll be bringing those back to you. So I'll just pause here and see if anyone had any questions about what I just reported out on or anything on the monthly report.
Thank you, Director Long. Any questions from the floor? Is that the conclusion of your report? Or did you
Yes,
have more?
ma'am.
Okay, I just want to make sure because you said you're pausing, which implied there might have been. Okay, with that, we'll move to the working group reports, which we did send out for the most part. So we're limiting this to questions so we can get into more substantive discussion. Wait, Adina, you just put your hand up.
I did. I'm sorry. Many of us were at the Oregon Recreation Parks Association annual conference this weekend, which is why I sort of skidded to a stop when I came here. And the Bureau got an award, 2022 Planning Award for South Park Blocks Master Plan. So it's glass and pretty, and you can't see because of the reflection on the thing, but I accepted this. And even though Tate White is no longer with Parks, she actually went all the way out to Bend to accept the award as well. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that information, and congratulations to the Bureau and to Tate for her hard work. With that, we'll move to the questions with respect to the working group and advisory committee reports. The first one is the Board Affairs Working Group, which Corbin is giving in Casey's stead because Casey was out of town. And I know, Corbin, that we have on the agenda also a more in-depth discussion, but maybe there's questions on the immediate report that was submitted. Any questions on the Board Affairs Working Group report? Hearing none, we'll move on to the Land Use and Infrastructure Working Group. That written report was also provided in your board packet. I hope you had a chance to review it. Any questions for David? I see Corbin's hand and Mike's hand and Casey's hand.
So my question has to do with, I guess my question has to do with what measures are in place to provide housing if and when the parks start to enforce camping. How is that process being thought about within the plan? I believe this is number 3 of the land use and infrastructure report.
Yeah, David, I'm not sure you can answer that, but you can give it a whirl. That may be something that is addressed more by staff in the context of the joint office, or maybe Lauren, you might be able to touch on it. David, you want to take a crack at it, or do you have anything?
I was going to ask for clarifying. Is that the one about the improvements to Laurelhurst Park? That one?
Street
Yeah,
vacation.
and-
Yeah, it's number
yeah.
3, the Oak Street improvements
Yeah.
in Laurelhurst Park. I was just
Yeah,
wondering if
Lauren, I
there's
don't
any
know if-
conversations around that. If not, then that's hopefully those will be broached moving forward.
I can say that when encampments are posted for removal, they are offered services, including housing. And that is, in this case, it was probably through the Street Services Coordination Center, which is I'm sorry, there's so many new acronyms, which is a new office that was created by the mayor in relation to earlier emergency declarations. So there are processes in place to ensure that services are requested. Are offered to folks when encampments are removed.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say with the land use, I'm looking at the working groups, all of us have our own reporting ways of reporting in. I would love to see a standardization at some point. And I just want to say that I really appreciate the project update timeline that was that the land use and infrastructure group has in their report. And if others can replicate that, I think it'll be just helpful in general for passing along information.
Thank you, Corbin. Maybe that's something for the Board Affairs Working Group to consider, is a standardization.
Yeah, I like
of that.
that. Yeah, a little standardization. Okay.
Yeah. Lauren, do you have something on that topic before we move on to Mike's question? We can't hear you, Lauren.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing about that. First of all, if you want to see a plan, we do have a plan for what's going to happen on Oak Street in that location. And the second thing is, as Adina said, Lucas Hilliard is in charge of trying to find to clean up the camps and to also relocate people to proper housing. And so, as Adina said, they always give them plenty of warning and actually direct them to different places at their choice. So we can get more information on exactly how they do that if you want, if that's helpful, Corbin. But they have a pretty extensive process for whenever they relocate people.
I think that would be great for a board, but I think it's also important for community members that are tuning into our meetings to know that you have things in place to actually house people. So thank you.
Thank you for that discussion. Mike.
Thanks. My question is actually also related to Laurelhurst Park, and I'm just trying to understand a little bit more the jurisdictional, how that works. Is this existing PBOT land that is being transferred to Parks, or will Parks be managing it for PBOT? I'm not quite sure I understand that.
So we have, do you want me to answer that, Adina? Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, so I'm going to share a screen. I think it's going to help to understand what's going on here. Can everyone see the screen right now?
Yep.
So this is the plan for what's happening. This is Oak Street, and that's the area where there was very heavy tenting and camping activity. And we are going, now that they've cleared it, PBOT has been kind and did a little level surfacing on the road here. And then we're going to be putting in these 4 pickleball courts to activate the area, as well as this is a little skate ramp for small skateboards and bikes, small children. And then this is a modular pump track for bicycles, a skills features track that'll be at this end of the park. So it'll be a good activation. You can see the strip along the edge is going to have benches in it so people can sit and watch. But to your question, this is PBOT right of way. It'll be vacated and we'll be taking it on. In the interim, we have an MOU that gives Parks the authority to act as if it's a park land, if it's part of, there's park on this side, park on that side. So we're going to be able to implement our rules and regulations as though it's part of the park in the interim. And they think that's going to take about 6 months to get the vacation through. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your question, Mike. Casey? We can't hear you, Casey.
Sorry, I was switching screens and I forgot to get off mute. So my question's actually on the next one down, which is the Clean Energy Fund. I'm not quite sure what's being asked or what's going on with that. Is Parks being asked to administer part of the fund? I'm not sure what's going on. I wonder what it is.
Not so much to, well, it may turn out that there might be some administration, but more so that there's more funds have been generated than anticipated. this is these particular areas they're calling targeted solicitations. So they're PSEF will be putting together an RFP or some sort of request for proposal for community groups, and we'll also be working with them directly to implement some projects. So the idea is that there is a lot more funds, and they're finding that there's less capacity for the community to implement some of the types of projects that they were anticipating implementing. So they still want the community very much involved. That's still the point, but bringing us in for those two particular targeted solicitations will help to expedite and to streamline that implementation. I see that Lauren also has her hands up, and Jen is here as well. She's begun conversations on the tree side.
You want me to jump in, Adina?
Sure.
So there's about $650 million they anticipate they're going to raise over the next 5 years. And they've put together a PDF, which shows the different categories that they're targeting. As Adina said, they're targeting 300 million for housing and small commercial energy efficiencies, 30 million, as she said, for resilient community centers, 100 million for transportation decarbonization, planning and investments for low carbon 82nd Avenue, how it used to be in the county and now we're taking it on. They're going to dedicate $10 million to that area and $100 million to low cost green financing for carbon reducing projects. So that's and the final thing is building community-based organizational capacity, $8 million for that one. I can share this PDF with everyone if that's helpful.
Yeah, please do that, Lauren.
Okay.
And I guess I'm a little confused. Is Parks being an advisory to the funds? Is that what's going on? Or are we actually getting community input and then advising from that point?
I'm going to take a crack at it.
We're probably going to be, we're probably going to be applying as an entity to use some of the funds to do things.
Okay.
Like build a community center resiliencies.
So to clarify what Lauren was showing, Casey, she showed the $30 million for resilient community centers. So I think what they're saying is, targeting the existing community centers to make them resilient using those resources.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I'll also add that in particular, the community center funds are woefully low, given what we know in terms of the expense associated with the work that we've already undertaken and or have planned. So, and we've shared that with them. So I don't know if they'll look to adjust that, or if maybe those funds will likely be used, or if those funds will be used more in the private sector.
Thank you. Chris, you had a question on land use and infrastructure?
Yeah, it was a follow-up question to the community centers that are being considered as like a resiliency island. I see that in the plan, it's the East Portland Community Center. And I know that some of the emergency preparedness planning with the city and the county is governed outside with the county structure. So just wondering how other community centers are being considered to be a resiliency island, and what factors and what does that mean for the community center in terms of the budget. And it looks like it's a partnership with Portland State University. And so is there going to be an expansion beyond the East Portland Community Center for these resiliency islands, or really starting with this community center first?
Well, I'll just start off, then I'm going to kick it to Lauren. So the PSU proposal was a graduate student study and research project, which was great, right? And will be helpful, but it's not exactly the same conversation. So EPCC, as you note, is already being utilized as a emergency facility, whether it's for extreme heat, poor air quality, or for storms. And so EPCC, because it's one of our newest centers and it's located geographically in an area where there's less, on the other side of 205, there's less opportunities for similar facilities to provide this service, is one of the reasons why there's some interest there. We've also already applied for funding to make improvements to EPCC to make it more resilient. Lauren, and I don't know what the criteria is going to be for community centers that they invest in outside of ours. So we have not gotten to that level of discussion yet. Lauren?
Right, we'll be talking to them at our next BPS meeting. Adina meets with them every month. And so we'll be talking to them about how to apply and what to apply. But some of the things we're thinking is we have 5 major community centers. And if we can build up the resiliency, the seismic capability of the building not falling down, the heating and cooling systems being resilient, the energy efficiency of the building, including in case of an electrical outage, then that would be great because those become resiliency centers for the community going forward. So Mount Scott, we're working on right now. That's already at 34 million. So that's Adina's point about, I'm just sending the outline right now and you'll see they had dedicated 30 million to community centers. We could spend that in one center. So more to come on that though.
Thank you for the additional information, Lauren. Adrian and then Corbin.
Yes, thanks. So, given the importance of this clean energy fund to Parks and Rec, both in terms of, the canopy focus and community centers and maybe even other aspects, I'm interested in what sort of administration's, I wouldn't say opinion, but experience has been with working effectively with them. And, is there some framework that we should be putting together going forward to get it to be as good as it can be? I know they've had a lot of trouble spending the money and actually leading the process. So would just be interested in some insights around that.
Yeah, so the PSAP fund has been exclusively community-based for community-based organizations and nonprofits. And so the city has not been involved at all until now. So these amendments to their to the rules were to allow for that because there's been because it's been challenging for the groups to have enough capacity and the private sector to have enough capacity to actually spend down the money, which is why there's an investment specifically on capacity building. So there isn't really, this is all new for all of us. We've had really just very initial conversations. We're starting to receive some information that they're thinking about. And like I said, I think if there's going to be a structure that we can share, we'll certainly share. But there's a lot of sensitivity around this. Not everyone thought that this should be expanded beyond community. So I'm sensitive to that. And like I said, it's so new and they didn't anticipate including the city from the beginning. So we're going to try our best to do it well and be wise and be strategic so that it continues to be a potential resource.
Right. Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Corbin.
When we're considering resiliency hubs, could we also think about shading structures as well as Wi-Fi accessibility? And even thinking about the ecology, human connection with misting stations that can also serve to water our trees during these times of extreme heat. I would love to see some more integrated opportunities to do both, take care of folks as well as take care of flora and fauna.
Thank you for that, Dr. Corbin.
Thank you for that comment. Any other questions for land use infrastructure? If not, we'll move on to financial sustainability working group. I hope folks had a chance to review that written document. We had a financial sustainability work group meeting and a BAC meeting. Any questions for Mike? If not, we'll move on to the community engagement working group. Corbin, I apologize. As you know, Aaron had a family emergency. If there's any questions, can you field them?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I hope folks had a chance to review the community engagement working group report. Any questions for the community engagement working group or Corbin? If not, we'll move on to, I believe we have a brief report from Corbin on the committee with respect to renaming A Park and Wilson Pool. Is that correct, Corbin?
I didn't necessarily prepare one because some of that information was folded into the community engagement working group. And so that is where we are. An agreement hasn't been met regarding the naming of A Park or Wilson Pool, but we are continuing to work through the process. And I would say just to look to the community engagement working group's report for details about how that transpired at the last meeting.
Great, thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to the Parks Levy Oversight Committee report. I think that was also sent out to the group. Any questions for Paul or staff on that topic? Great. With that, we'll move on to the foundation report. Randy.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share a deck and we'll see how much I can get to in my 5 minutes. So let's see here. So we had our first fall Friends and Allies event. Oops, this is not the right start. There we go. Spring, we do 2 summits a year for Friends and Allies groups, and they include days of service. And this year, this season, we did Whitaker Pond, and we had about 40 people, including 15 to 20 youth, in partnership with People of Color Outdoors and Columbia Slough Watershed Council. So it was a great success. And from what I understand, super fun. I couldn't be there. And then we did a second one at Leach Botanical Garden, which was smaller and more intimate because it was real stewardship and a learning opportunity for folks there. So we were really happy about that. And then at the summit, which we had at the Kennedy School, we had Dr. Terry Cross, who's a citizen of the Seneca Nation and founder of the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And he did a really great speech on thinking about sort of, I'm suddenly blanking on his phrase, but it's basically indigenous worldview of a sort of relational idea as opposed to a transactional idea. And it was quite inspiring and quite pointed, actually. I was kind of surprised. He didn't pull any punches with the group, and it was really good, really stimulating, and stimulated a lot of conversations afterwards. And then we did 4 workshops on trauma-informed de-escalation strategies, on accessibility and kind of a wider look at accessibility and organizational audits, and small grants made simple. So helping people sort of understand there's a kind of simple path to writing grants, as opposed to sometimes a much more complex path, and then organizational equity, internal focus. And they were all very well attended and very well received. And it was overall a really great event for our first live one that we had done. We'd done some online ones for the fall season, for the fall summit, which is really focused on more learning opportunities. Spring is more celebratory, where we give out some awards and just really honor the great volunteer work and organizational work that's going on in parks. So this was much more of a learning opportunity, and thanks to all the PPR people who turned out for that. And we had a little happy hour, so it was really fun and a great start to in-person. Whoops, sorry about that. Having a bad, there we go. So, whoops, I put up the wrong one. One more time. Yes, okay. And there were about 77 friends and partner groups represented at that. So it was a real success, and I do in all parts to my colleague, Jessica Green, who led that effort. We have a fall grants cycle. The decisions are being made shortly. We had 22 applications, and we have about $25,000 to give out, partially funded by US Bank and also by PPR from some of the levy money. And we have a great group of people making the decisions, thanks to Mike Elliott from the board, and also Kawana, Clayton Bullock from City of Portland, and a bunch of good community members making those decisions. We're anxious to see who wins. And then in the other side of our world, we completed our Thompson Elk Fountain feasibility study and released it yesterday at the Landmarks Commission. And I'll sort of take you on a quick tour of that work. We've been working on this for a number of months, and then on May 22nd, the City Council passed a resolution to fully restore the elk that had been sort of in, and the fountain, and that had been in question. And so we proceeded with that. We received a very generous contribution to fund the feasibility work. As you may remember, the elk fountain, has been overseen by 4 different bureaus, and so kind of getting it moving towards some resolution of being restored was a little bit of a task. And so we took that on just to get figure out the plan, figure out the price tag on it. And we've done these kinds of interventions and offered help in lots of different kinds of projects, ranging from Director Park to working with friends groups on Peninsula Park Rose Gardens to Gateway Green we played an early role in, and then of course the Barbara Walker Crossing, where we served both in commissioning the design and overseeing the construction. We put together a project advisory group of some great folks from the historic preservation community, but also urban design, to kind of look at the context of the fountain. And we hired ARG, a very, very experienced restoration firm with a kind of side specialty in fountains, and Mig, who was part of the team that was working on the South Park Blocks plan. And then we also, just given the times and the kind of rethinking of a lot of histories and characters in history, we hired 2 historians to sort of take a deep dive on the patron, David P. Thompson, the Thompson Elk Fountain, and then also at the architect and sculptor, everybody who was involved with the actually making of it, and then also to look at the social history of it. So we had 2 great historians who worked on that, and all of their work is on our website now. And we found out some kind of interesting things. We confirmed a lot of good things about David P. Thompson. He actually was kind of on the right side of history, unlike many of his peers of that time. He was an abolitionist who stood against Chinese exclusionary laws, and the monument itself, or the fountain itself, was a monument to the Oregon Humane Society. And then the social history, we discovered that there's been over 30 documented times of protest around the fountain, primarily in Lounsdale Square. And it's been a center of government. There was a labor temple on Lounsdale for many years. And so it's always been a hotbed of free speech, and ranging from early Wobblies to a protest over the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, to a veterans parade protesting financial hardship in the Depression, to a police killing of a Black teenager in 1975, to things like a sick out by volunteers from the Metro Crisis Center. So it was really interesting to sort of see, this larger social context of this. And we also did some work doing some interviews with some of the contemporary protesters, and that story still needs to be told, and we're actually going to be soliciting people's stories on a couple of social media sites that Milo Reed is conducting. But basically, it would appear that the fountain was not a target. It was it was object of kind of a lot of collateral damage, you might say, in the sort of, in the difficulties of the 2020 protests. And as some of you may remember, when the elk was taken away, it was very quickly replaced by a temporary elk that some of the protesters actually built. So we feel like, it's a good story that we can potentially build upon, that this was originally commissioned, as a monument to the Oregon Humane Society, and, was not sort of in the same category as some of the more contested historic figures that have been taken down. Found this great quote from the Listening Post column in the Oregonian in 1921, that you can get into any kind of argument at Lounsdale Square. And this writer talked about how the Romans provided a forum as a safety valve for their population, and Portland's safety valve was Lounsdale Square, and here they come to blow off pressure. So our design objectives per the City Council resolution was to restore and rehabilitate, seismically stabilize, and add a recirculating pump to the fountain. And then we also wanted to really look at the context, because it's never really been a safe place for people to get up close to the fountain. So we wanted to look at the context, and we just took that upon ourselves to do it. And then we had the civic objectives to position the Thompson Elk as a unifying civic gesture, and then look down the road at some, to pair public investment and wide-reaching crowdsource campaign, philanthropic campaign to further that idea of a unifying civic gesture. And we're closely following the Secretary of Interior's standards for restoration on the actual fountain. The team scanned all the parts and to create to model the reassembly. And what we discovered under a worst case scenario, many things can't be determined until further design development. But about 18 pieces might have to be fully replaced. We're going to try to replace as few as possible, is the idea, but that's the worst case scenario. And all in, that's about $1.3 million, not including any internal city soft costs or overhead. The streetscape priorities were really to make some safe zones for bicyclists and pedestrians and vehicles, and to better protect the fountain, which was somewhat vulnerable. Maintenance, and really the bottom line is to create a fully accessible, much safer, more welcoming place for people to enjoy the fountain. This is what it looks like today. It was recently restriped by PBOT in August, so it gives you sort of a plan view. Vehicles have been pushed to the south, bicyclists are to the north, but it's just a striping plan. And what we wanted to do is further elaborate that with materials to really build upon the idea of it being a place. And so that would include, some paving around the fountain. It would include bollards to protect the fountain from vehicles, and a clear separation of cyclists. And then also important to us was that it would be a fully accessible space. And so we did not engage disability advocates on this one. We so far, because this was just a 30% schematic design. So this is very, very high level. If it were to proceed, that would be the first stop to really get feedback on it. But this was developed by MIG's disability team. And that would add about another $640,000 to the price tag. So all in about 1.9. And if we were able to do all of this, and that's a lot of ifs in there, this would be like. It would actually be a pretty nice place and a much safer place to enjoy the fountain. And so it was met with good feedback from the Landmarks Commission. It was a design advice request, so they were merely weighing in. And community members also weighed in, and I think we're off to a good start. Now we just have to figure out where the money's coming from and how to take the next few steps on it. So, so far so good on that. I'm happy to answer questions on any of it.
Thank you, Randy. A while back, I think when you were talking about the summit, Chris commented into the chat about the relational worldview model. Chris, do you want to comment briefly on that?
Yeah, sorry, that was the phrase I was having a hard time remembering. It's been a long day of Zoom, a little bit fadey. So basically, I would hate to try to paraphrase Terry because he's so eloquent. I don't know if you've seen him. There's many different videos in which you can see him firsthand. But really, the idea, the central idea of it is a less sort of linear, goal-oriented relationship with the world and with within organizations to a much more building upon relationships and quality of communication and being sort of less driven by a linear progression to goals is probably the simplest way to put it. Adina was there. If you want to add upon that, I would welcome it. Like I say, I'm a little bit brain dead after I think this is my 5th Zoom, long Zoom meeting of the day. So
I just did a quick Google search.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
And yeah, under the Family and Youth Services Bureau, there's actually, I think you can actually listen to the podcast. So I'll put the I will put the link in the chat, and it was really, really interesting and informative. And he just had a very articulate way of like using layman terms, even though he wasn't, but really being able to sort of let us all understand it, even if we didn't have sociology and psychology degrees. And it was the kind of information, honestly, that I think could be really helpful for folks who are wanting to engage more intentionally and with care with the Indigenous community, really sort of understanding how they see the world and how they move through it versus how we do, and how it's different, and could really just sort of open up folks' eyes. So yeah, it was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and I'll only add that it's once again, it's really a 7 generations view, and that really came through clearly. And what I appreciated about Terry is, like I say, he didn't pull any punches. There were uncomfortable moments, I think, for a lot of folks in the audience during it, but he, landed it in such a, gracious and ultimately collaborative, outlook that I think that, it was like somebody, I won't even try an analogy. I would just welcome you all to, check out some of his podcasts or his YouTube videos. Well worth hearing straight from the person.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on any of the foundation's activities? If not, we'll go into a presentation on the pilot program on stipend offerings. Melissa.
Pardon me. Thank you so much for having me, Parks Board. I'm Melissa Arnold. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Community Engagement Manager for Portland Parks and Recreation. It's good to be here. My colleague and a member of my team, Odalis Perez-Kraus, actually was going to be giving this presentation, but she is struggling with some illness this evening. So I'm going to play me and also her. So if it seems a little disjointed, it's because I'm actually doing two roles. So I am going to set a little context like I had planned. Then I'll run through the PowerPoint and kind of talk about this. And then at the end, we'll kind of discuss if that works for everyone. I'm totally cool to take questions throughout, but I might answer some of the questions that you have as we go through it. So if you're comfortable waiting until the end, we might already have some answers. And just to clarify, this is not necessarily a review of the stipend pilot. This is some work we're doing to pull together some standard operating procedures around incentives and participation stipends, and the there has been a limited pilot, and kind of looking at that pilot and talking with folks has been a part of that overall process. So just to kind of clarify, it's all kind of gotten rolled up into the pilot chat, but it's not just that. Okay, so last year, with my division manager, Todd, and our director, Director Long, we identified that we were having a lot of energy and need to discuss incentives in the way that we use incentives as a bureau. Actually, I'm just going to address headlong, I might as well. The word that you use actually matters a lot when it comes to this kind of payment. And there's a lot of words that you can't use because payment indicates like employment, or compensation indicates that, or stipend is a process that we don't yet have. So if I seem like I'm stumbling over that word, it's just because it's been something that is, we're trying to describe a participation payment or incentive, something that acknowledges a person's involvement in a way that mitigates barriers and supports the emotional effort that sometimes is going into the work that our volunteer advisory supports give. So anyway, so we identified this need. Yes, Director Long.
Melissa, if you could take care to avoid acronyms.
Yes,
I'm playing human glossary in the chat, but if you could take care to say the words out fully, that would be great.
Absolutely. I apologize if I used one. They sneak out. Thank you so much for that reminder. So, we identified that this was an area of inquiry that we needed to look into. The Office of Community and Civic Life is responsible for setting policy or making policy recommendations around this for the city, but they started a process a while ago. I'll kind of talk about that as we move forward. And we identified that we likely wouldn't have a policy and process developed on a citywide level for quite some time. So that necessitated us to assign this. I had some capacity as of this summer on my team to take this project up. So Odalis has completed, or she's been working on what's effectively a best practice scan, a review of the stipend pilot, as well as some internal stakeholder discussions around the needs and barriers that people have experienced around this. So I will jump to being Odalis now, and I just wanted to acknowledge that it wasn't me that did all this work, but a member of my team. And so, yeah, let's roll through this. Let me pull up my screen.
I also want to just, while Melissa's getting set, I just wanted to also make it clear to the board that this is sort of an evolving process. And while we did have a stipend pilot associated with Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, we've also provided stipends in very discrete projects. So for instance, we have a Native community gathering committee that that a stipend was made available to them. So just wanted to make it clear that we're actually looking for some input and some feedback from the board, because this is an evolving SOP. And whatever we do might actually help inform city policy. So it's kind of an exciting place to be. They gave us their well wishes on moving forward with something, and that's really exciting. So sorry for interrupting.
No, this is great. Thank you. You have been an important voice in this as well, and so I'm happy that you're jumping in. Okay, so just as Director Long said, this is a process. We're still in the midst of the process. As I said to senior management team when we visited them a couple weeks ago, we have some ingredients in a bowl. We think this is probably how we should make the cake, and we want to make sure that before we bake it, that you can tell us. So. All right, so just as an overview, we're looking to standardize our practices around offering stipends and incentives to members of the public for consultation and engagement through our public involvement processes, and that would be across the divisions. And so standardizing those processes have a lot of benefits, particularly as it comes to us managing this and being able to project cost over time, as well as helping the community know what to expect from us, and ensuring that we have an equitable experience across engagement types. So as I noted already in my intro, given that citywide policy and process recommendations are pending, we've been directed to move forward with recommending interim standard operating procedures for the Bureau. I just want to be clear, because as people have thrown around like that we're developing a policy, and that's not the case. We're not developing a policy. We're developing operating procedures, recommendations that we would use until that citywide policy came on. And we're trying to do that in such a way that there will be no change. So we're reviewing what's already happening and trying to anticipate where the direction will go, so that we hopefully don't experience disruption. So just as I mentioned, it's important that they are built in alignment with current city policy. It's important that they're sustainable as the policy further develops and resources shift over time. So right now we have the benefit of the Parks Levy. If the Parks Levy were to not be in place, would we still have the resources to support these kinds of payments? Basically understanding the financial impact across divisions. The procedures need to be supportive of racial equity and built using a framework that appropriately values the expertise and lived experience of community. But being mindful of the relationship around money, value, and time. This has come up in some of our stakeholder interviews, that we want to be cautious around compensation and how that can change the perception related to the relationship community members have to our work. And while that form of payment can or I guess stipend or incentive can be it can be welcome, it can also feel transactional to folks. So just being mindful of that. It is something that's come to our attention. We're not aware of it, but we believe that the value of implementing a process here outweighs that risk largely, while we're mindful. So these procedures have to be navigable by staff who may not regularly engage the public, and that's important. So if I'm working in land stewardship and we're developing an engagement or an advisory committee, that I am able to navigate these procedures with internal support. And so that the community members that we're working with and we're serving are not experiencing wildly different processes. So we are recommending standard operating procedures or best practices for existing practices related to financial support for community. We've reviewed, so the existing process, we reviewed relevant background information from Office of Community and Civic Life, the policy development work that they've done. We've interviewed PP&R staff members within the Bureau who can offer context around past practices, present practices, current needs, relevant partners to engage, as well as some of the barriers that they've experienced. We've interviewed some City of Portland staff, primarily. I've had a couple of conversations before Odalis took this project on with, for instance, somebody who worked on this at Prosper Portland. We've spoken with Summer Erickson, the deputy controller, around some of these policies. And also just to check in, like, should we be moving forward with this? Are we out of our lane here? And we were giving the blessing to move forward, as Director Long said. We connected with community members who participated in the stipend pilot. We reviewed available jurisdictional and organizational partner practices and strategies. And we reviewed reasoning and evaluated appropriateness of fit of various options. So the emerging practice review, we reviewed some SOPs from standard operating procedures, from Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, that they are just a little bit ahead of us, but doing very similar work. The City of Portland, Portland Utility Board recently implemented a stipend pilot. So we reviewed that information, toolkit and stipend information for Metro, ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, City of Bend, Prosper Portland, and we outreached to Tualatin Hills and Minneapolis Parks and Recreation departments. So for internal staff, we spoke, I didn't put names here. Some folks you'll know, but really wanted to focus on their roles in the organization, or Odalis didn't put names here, but analyst and urban forestry commission liaison. Part of the reason was because we've heard a lot of energy around stipends, and the fact that we don't have stipends really impacting urban forestry's ability to have representative commission. So the barriers there are real, and wanted to hear from them. Community Gardens has done a lot of work. So Director Long talked about some of those discrete stipends or honoraria that we've been able to implement, and they have led the way as in many ways as a work group around some of this work. So spoke with Community Gardens leadership. We spoke with the partnerships coordinator that's within operations, and actually within community relations, our work group, to understand what might have come from partners, friends groups, what kind of requests have been made and the needs. We talked with community engagement leadership. Well, myself, actually, that was me. And I gave input into this draft that was reflective of the things that I've heard in my time and have experienced as we've navigated this as a community engagement team. Our deputy controller, as I said, and then our accounting manager. So those were some internal interviews that we did. We also spoke with senior management team, and there is currently a draft of this in their inbox for review and feedback. So what we've heard, I'll actually kind of talk a little bit about what we've heard. So from our emerging practice review, I think that some of the key things that we heard was that, yes, there's a lot of energy around this regionally. Stipends and participation incentives are widely used, and it's a real disadvantage as a city that we're not offering that at this point. And so that was pretty widely acknowledged in our practice review. We were able to identify some common amounts for various types of participation, as well as mechanisms. And we, unfortunately, so for the Tualatin Hills and Minneapolis Parks and Recreation departments, there were no standardized practices around this. And so we weren't able to, with our initial outreach to a couple of peer departments, we weren't able to get a good sense of what this might look like in an organization like ours. But organizations like ours within the city, other bureaus and offices are implementing pilots and processes. So what we heard largely from internal staff, we heard that the payment processes that are currently in place are cumbersome, administratively burdensome. They are full of barriers for our folks, and there were a lot of recommendations around simplifying the processes, both for staff and for participants. And there were some pretty discrete recommendations that were that rolled up out of these conversations. Randy, it's exciting that you're here. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but one of the cool things that came out of our chat with Megan was an idea that potentially we could look into a partnership with a partner like Portland Parks Foundation to create a process where we might be able to partner around incentives. So looking at a partner and maybe identifying a consistent contract so that our city processes don't get in the way of having a fluid and easy to navigate experience for folks. I think that the other key things were just around the importance of being able to offer this. We've been able to offer through our pilot, which I'll give an overview of, some stipends, and there was a perception that despite the fact that it was difficult to navigate, that it was a benefit. And yes, we know that this has been a request from many groups over time. Some things that came out of our SMT meeting right on the front end was that there was a desire from assets and development to coordinate with the program managers in that work group or in that division, so that we are thinking about the impact that this could have on capital and planning projects. That was well received. We will be doing some work there. And there was some ideas around, could this also extend with workforce development? They're doing some looking at like, could guest interview panelists, subject matter experts, could they be compensated? And so it feels like that could be rolled into this. And we have sent the drafts out, like I said, for review with the hope we anticipate that there's going to be other lines of inquiry that we need to move along before we have what is a draft that's fully put together. But we wanted to come and get that feedback early on. So we've got some a memo that we've developed that outlines our process, and we have a sample draft SOP that's currently with SMT for review. So just a real quick overview of the pilot, because I know that that's of interest. We were, as part of this, directed to review the stipend pilot and engage folks that had participated in the stipend pilot. We had an extremely limited participation sample, and I thought that this was worth calling out for two reasons. One, because the information that we got is largely anecdotal and shouldn't be meant to be representative of community's input. But also because despite the fact that we offered the stipend to the full work group, all the community members participating in 2 Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland work groups, as well as an advisory committee for renaming, we've only had a handful of folks take us up on that. And so I think that sometimes there's an assumption that if money's on the table, folks are going to take it, but that's not always the case. So Bonnie, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. I wanted to give you a chance to finish because you were kind of on a roll, but I had a couple questions with respect to, I was wondering if you had maybe had any opportunity to do any either research or outreach or thinking about strategies to help that it feel less transactional when a stipend is offered. And I guess I'm interested also to know, well, why don't I ask that question first and then you can.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that has come up through this and like through this process and through this first round of review is that concern sounds like a strong word. I think it's just like a flag that folks are throwing up for us. Like, we don't want to totally like the concept of volunteerism and like how we interact with our volunteers. We need to be aware of how this could impact that. But I have not done research, and it hasn't been discreetly named as an aspect of the scope of this. But it is something I think like doing some research around whether there are best practices and yeah.
I mean, I'm also thinking about it in the context of, when you think about like when we do things like jury duty or things like that, for example, and there's very nominal pay associated with that, for example, and there's an option to donate it back to the jury, whatever it is, right? It's things like they make the little jury room nicer by providing coffee and snacks and whatever else. You know, I'm just wondering if you know, maybe with some of the research of what other communities have done, you know, that could be included in that work.
That's a super valuable suggestion. Thank you. That's a great example of something, sort of an innovative approach to that challenge. So thank you. Corbin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't understand, and maybe this is just my own personal point of view, this complication around it being transactional. You have community experts that are acting as consultants on particular projects, and their time should be compensated. And maybe there needs to be a different tier in which there is community consultants that are going to be following a project through versus volunteering, which has a different connotation to it. A lot of times community members are volunteering to work through barriers created by the very government that put them in place. And so it's not reparations by any stretch of the imagination, but it's work being put in to make things better, I would say, for everybody in the end. And so I would like to see, me personally, I would like to see a distinction between volunteerism versus, you know, community consultants. And then the wording that is kind of rubbing me the wrong way is anecdotal feedback versus maybe having exit interviews. As a person that came from a hard science background, but being a social science in it, anecdotal feedback completely would say takes away the power of community voice when they are providing feedback, versus if you say exit interview and how things came about, or maybe you were referring just to the amount of feedback that was provided, and so it doesn't have the same robustness. But I think not diminishing community members' narratives is, I think it's an important point here.
Thank you, well taken. And yes, I think it's also important to note that the concerns that have been raised around sort of like the transaction, that transactional aspect have, like, I think through each conversation, there's still been an acknowledgement that there's still expertise and that this is still an important thing to move forward. But I am very appreciative of you calling that out. I think that anecdotal, yes, that is around the amount. So just to kind of jump forward a little bit, we only received responses from 3 people. So we wanted to be very clear that those responses, while important feedback and feedback that we should heed, could not be representative of the broader community. But I get that that word in some ways is cutting the I don't know, importance of that down. So we can work on that. Paul.
Thank you. I just wanted to share, I think it's really important work to help reduce barriers to participation. And I want to completely echo what Corbin said about sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between expert contributions and volunteerism. So we need to figure out where that line is. And I'm not sure it's always going to be a bright line.
Yeah.
And then to Bonnie's point, I do like the notion of making these engagements more transformational than transactional. And I want to give a couple of examples that I think are pertinent. One is, something that PP&R did on the Cully Park project through the partner Verde, in order to encourage people to come to meetings. Meals were provided, and translators, and childcare. And that really seemed to open doors to making people participate, and it eliminates the need for W-9s and all the complications that come from, is it going to go over the threshold that's required, and what do you do? And no one wants to deal with the headaches of that. I'm currently working on a project where we're engaging an indigenous tribe and wanting to offer a stipend to people who are serving on a cultural committee And none of them wanted it personally. They wanted to donate it to organizations. They felt like it was part of their contribution to the community. So I think it's one of these very well-intentioned endeavors, and there's a lot of puppies that could result. So I guess my bottom line would be, let's keep it as simple as we can, because it could get super complicated. Thank you.
So just to kind of summarize what I'm hearing from you, Paul, let's not underestimate the value and importance of other barrier mitigation that we do with our engagements. And let's, I think, keep it simple so that we're and aware of kind of the I guess, cascading impacts of developing this. Is that fair to say? Cool. All right. So Randy?
Yeah, assume I'm on mute. No, I'm not. Yeah, so we started out doing stipends in 2020 when we were created our first think tank discussions around Paseo. And we kind of followed Metro's model. In fact, they helped us fund it. They've been very successful with it. And it was, it was hard to get away from the transactional nature of it on Zoom. That was really hard. But I think so much of it is, it kind of gets back to the relational worldview, right? It's really thinking about, it holistically, as Paul pointed out. It's about, the space you create when you can be, together and even on Zoom. So it's, I think there's, to kind of go back to protocols that needs to be kind of built in at the front end in terms of thinking about it as holistically as possible. Certainly. And then for us, a very clear line between volunteerism and community expertise is volunteerism is kind of one and done. It's like show up, work in the park, show up, help us out with this event. But all of the other stipends we're paying are for multiple engagements over time, and so that's also a relationship building. For us, it's really helped us expand our network into the community through that by having just that repetition and long-term engagement and investment beyond the money, and then echoing Paul again, we give the option to give the money to the community organization of your choice. So it's worked out pretty well for us so far on a very modest level. I mean, we're doing stipends for all of our steering committees and grant committees.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that maybe calling you for an interview to hear about your experiences. All right, so Corbin, and then I'll move us forward.
Thank you. I'll finish with this point. I think when we talk about incentives, we also have to recognize the historical legacy of distrust with government. And I think Randy announced it a little bit about community building and building with community. And so this idea that they're being compensated or otherwise they wouldn't interact with government, there's a reason for it. There's a history behind it, and that should be acknowledged as well.
Thank you. Yes. With my I worked for the Housing Authority before, and we wouldn't have dreamed that folks would fill out a survey if we didn't have some sort of support around that, because there was a lot of frustration there and a lack of trust in some places. And so like it was sort of part of how we operated was, well taken. One thing I will note around the sort of one and done versus like the definition between volunteerism and sort of this ongoing consultation is it's not that's going to be a difficult thing for us to find. I'll just note that. I'll put it out in front. I think we're going to do a really good job of trying to define that. But there are times where we incentivize, for instance, Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland. We had workshops, and the way that we supported in community members reflective of a broader range of identities and lived experiences with engaging with this subject matter or the subject content was by incentivizing participation. We offered food, we offered hopefully a fun time, and we offered gift cards for kind of working through the workshop. And so that was a one and done kind of thing, but I would file that under consultation. And so it just becomes really difficult. And that's part of why it's been a challenge to get something in place. So we do have some recommendations around amounts and around the different types of engagement, like advisory committee versus a survey incentive, or, we have some recommendations in the drafts around that. Okay, so just to kind of really quickly run through, I know I'm running through my time because I love chatting with y'all, but just to kind of give you a sense of some of the open-ended responses that we got from the folks that were able to give feedback on the stipend pilot. So I will also note that the reason why we received 3 responses was because we decided that we should focus on working with folk or connecting with folks around this feedback who had gone through the whole process. So folks that had filled out paperwork, received the stipend, they had a sense of how the whole thing worked. And it ended up being the case that because of the delayed nature of the second sort of wave of the stipend pilot, those folks hadn't made it all the way through that process yet. So most of the feedback was from Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland work group members. So the key things were like kind of echoing what we heard from staff who had worked with folks on these. There was a lot of paperwork and it was a lot of back and forth. Had to email 3 times before I received the appropriate forms, kind of speaking to that administrative capacity. And clearly, if people have bank accounts, the stipend process works fine. If they don't, which is much more common among BIPOC and low-income community members, cashing a check or receiving a direct deposit is not doable. And I will echo that from my experience working with folks in affordable housing. It's not unusual that folks didn't have access to a bank account. And so having options that don't require a bank account can really help. So other open-ended responses, as anything else participate, there was a general, anything else you want to share kind of question at the end. And I'll note these are more about the engagement itself, but one of the pieces of feedback was it was challenging being a community member, but engaging around PP&R workplace language and procedures. I don't know how much I had to offer regarding such internal conversations. And while there was an attempt to reach non-traditional community members, I still feel the entire process was geared toward those English-speaking voting residents because the process was then quantifiable. Community engagement needs to be about meaningful and high-quality engagement from all members of the community, not just what is easily translatable into a bureau work plan. And again, I think that was reflective of the focus of that engagement. So internal staff feedback. They appreciated the ability to provide a stipend, shared that it was favorable news. Feedback was also shared that had it not been offered, there was a belief participants would have expressed disappointment because that has been the case in other similar ad hoc work groups and committees. Overall, the process for ICA, which is, gosh, my brain just went totally blank. It is independent contractor agreement, I believe. If there's any fiscal folks on here and I'm wrong, pop up. So the process is laborious, too much paperwork, too many steps required to provide payment. Staff recommend pursuing or developing an option with less administrative burden. And then there was confusion for at least one participant. I actually engaged with this participant. So the staff had, the person believed that they had opted in. The staff said the person didn't opt in. Later shared she had not received payment. There was confusion about why. And we worked to rectify that situation, but that is now a negative experience, right? And the whole point is to have a positive experience. So really understanding that there needs to be clarity around opting in and opting out, and make sure that everybody is clear on that. So now we get to our recommendations. So as a team that kind of engaged in this, we've got quite a few recommendations. Please hold tight. So first is review, improve, and finalize standard operating procedures, implement and utilize them until a citywide policy and procedures are developed and approved. So our recommendations are to develop standard payment ranges framework for various engagement methods to support consistency and decision-making across operational focuses or divisions. we should develop an approval process differentiating between advisory bodies with ongoing authorization and participation types and strategies that require case-by-case approval. So just to kind of unpack that. So the example would be, we wouldn't have to every year get approval to offer a stipend to, let's say, Urban Forestry Commission, but we might need to have a process then to, like, maybe the director gives a standing approval that commission members are offered a stipend, but we don't want just a blanket. Anybody who engages in anything gets a, so like differentiating between what needs an approval each time versus what has an ongoing approval. Next, develop and implement a participation agreement template, inclusive of an opt-in and opt-out participation form or something that kind of seals the deal on either we're opting in or opting out. Now I'm hearing from this group that maybe offering an option of donating or somehow otherwise supporting the community with that payment, that might be a part of that form. That's the first recommendation, first time we've gotten that recommendation. Payment liability functions, it's used as part of the process for accountability and record keeping. So it's important. We are not everyone's tax consultant, and folks can make their own choices around their tax liability and whether or not they want to go above $600, but they should be made aware by us of what liability they may be taking on. Next, identify and outline relevant payment mechanisms within the SOP. So I want to differentiate between, I'm about to get into recommendations around improving our payment mechanisms, but we do have some already in place that we can start using while we're working to improve. So that's sort of the approach that we recommend. So the next set of recommendations are around reducing barriers to payment registration and receipt to ensure a more supportive and navigable experience for recipients. So explore that independent contractor agreement process to streamline and reduce barriers, which would include, because right now that's our key mechanism for stipends. Like that's one of the things we have as a city that we can pay folks through. So identifying a secure platform for individuals to submit required forms and documentation. We heard from at least one person that they felt very uncomfortable submitting their documents over email because it's not secured, and we're asking for things like social security number. And then implementing a fillable participation agreement form or template to serve the function of the ICA with the other items that or the other aspects that we need for this. So it could kind of serve both purposes, and then we don't have to have a bajillion forms. It also would create support for folks throughout the Bureau. Again, folks that don't regularly do this, but if it's a fillable template as opposed to like create an ICA. Yes, Corbin.
I was just putting my hand up in the queue for asking questions. I didn't want to interrupt you, but since you did mention social security numbers as part of the strategy, I think that also puts undocumented folks as well as maybe homeless folks out of the opportunity to contribute to these processes. And I was wondering, how are you thinking through that?
Well, one of our recommendations is around a potential payment distribution partnership. And we've also done some exploring with the city controller's office around city gift card administration. That could be gift card administration up to $500 that would allow for us to, but we're not yet there. So that's like, we would be implementing some of these things knowing that these are problems. We know that there are barriers for folks without a bank account, folks without a social security number, folks without a home address. And how can we start to implement something while solving for that? So that's kind of the path.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Portland Parks Foundation, we had an initial chat and there seemed to be some interest in exploring that. So our recommendation would be that we explore that payment distribution partnership, develop a more participant-friendly payment option. Just to give you an example of what that could look like a standing contract where we refer folks to Portland Parks Foundation to receive that payment, and they're able to have a more direct payment experience like a gift card through that contract, and then pay administrative fee to support our partner in that work. And also the side benefit of connecting community members to this important resource in the community. So the other thing is following up with our deputy controller to determine if the interim gift card solution that we discussed in our interview is viable. And if it's viable, build that payment option out in the SOP, kind of addressing what you brought up, Corbin. All right, our last page, I promise. I can give recommendations all day long, but our last page of recommendations is ensure bureau-wide adoption of the standard operating procedures. We don't want this to just be a document that sits in a file on a computer, but actually support our colleagues. So offering navigation support, empowerment to stakeholders throughout the Bureau, and further ensuring consistency. So what we would recommend is developing and sharing additional supports for the internal process through both community engagement and accounting or fiscal, including workflow diagrams and informational sessions to support our colleagues in understanding the reason for the operating procedures and how to navigate them. And then where necessary, PP&R leadership support updates to existing codes, bylaws, or other governing documents that support equitability and stipends or incentives. So one of the conversations we had, particularly with the Urban Forestry Commission liaison, was that there is currently written, I think in city code, it's actually we're not able to give a stipend. We're not able to compensate the expertise of those committee members. So it would actually require a change in that I believe code. So we would need to review the guiding documents of all of our committees and would need our leadership support in addressing those. And now we kind of get to timeline and where we're at. So we provided the draft documents to our leadership senior management team for review and comment. It's currently with them. We are, let's see, SMT is going to be reviewing and providing feedback around input, any gaps, especially around stakeholder engagement. I will fully acknowledge that we haven't done a ton of external engagement around this outside of the best practice reviews. And part of the reason for that is because we want to be respectful of community's engagement with us. And this is something that we've heard loud and clear from community members. Like there is a desire for this option. It is not, we're not, it's not a mystery. We're not unsure that there's a desire for this. So just thinking about the limited resource we have in developing our own standard operating procedures, doing a wide-ranging engagement around what that looks like is not advisable from where we started. However, if the Parks Board has feedback around that approach, super happy to receive that feedback. Last, extending findings based on recommendations. So an example was the interview panelist. You know, if we find that there are other conversations or other types of processes that should be rolled into the standard operating procedure because it just makes sense, we may extend the scope. So now we get to questions for the Parks Board. So the first thing is sort of the support that we need. So part of the reason why we as a city don't have a great process around this is because there's a lot of stuff outside of Parks Portland Parks purview. So a lot of this has to do with payment mechanisms that are allowable with the city and things like that. So I think advocacy, advocacy with leadership of our city around why it is important to have low barrier payment supports and incentives for community participation is the biggest thing I can ask for. I know that sounds silly, but the attention hasn't been as there hasn't been enough attention on that issue. The payment mechanisms that we have at our disposal oftentimes are geared toward folks that have a significant amount of stability in their lives, and so advocating is huge. The next thing is any consideration. So you've already been kind enough to share some of the considerations. If there are additional considerations that we're not thinking about or that haven't yet been kind of talked through, we would be super happy to have that feedback. And if there's if there's questions we should be asking, I think that as part of this, like, let's take this opportunity and surface those questions. and then input on any missing elements, just to kind of further, I don't know, emphasize that point. If there are missing elements to the outreach and feedback that we've received, the best practice scan. So real quick before Adrian, before I pass it over to you, I will just say that there, as I said, there's a draft memo that outlines the work that we've done so far and kind of the feedback that we've gotten in more detail. There's also a draft standard operating procedure. After senior management team gets that back to us, I'd like to recommend us maybe sending it to you for some feedback and for you to have a better review, a more focused review of what we've actually, because I've just kind of talked about it, but you can actually see the feedback that folks have given. That's what I would recommend. That's what I'd hope for. I'm totally open to hearing about other thoughts that the Parks Board has. Adrian.
Yeah, Melissa, so what's the range of stipend you're talking about? I know it hasn't been worked out in detail, but what's sort of the magnitude of?
Yeah, so that is in the, it actually, we do have some recommended amounts in the draft standard operating procedure. It's roughly, if I'm remembering, I hesitate to even say it, but I want to say that we're recommending $25 per hour, up to 3 hours for a standalone like gift card type of incentive. Amounts of $40 to $80 per meeting, up to $500 per year for ongoing advisory body involvement, and something around the range of $100 to $200, I think maybe $100 to $150 for like an incentive for like a gift card raffle or something along the lines for like if you were trying to support survey work or something that like that's more of like a draw a name, one person or 3 people get this thing. So something, I want to say that those are the ranges, pulling that from my brain.
I realize now that I was in one of your pilots, I think. I was asked if I wanted stipend for something and I said no. But I remember saying, when I got asked that, it seemed like there wasn't much framing around, what is this? What is it for? Is it standard operating procedure? So I think, going forward, I actually think my experience is actually trying to get feedback from patients on quality of care and other things around, how care is organized and that type of thing. And, it was set up as an expectation. We are paying for your time, or, we're providing this incentive for your time. So it may be actually less confusing to set it up as an expectation, which then, someone can have the opportunity to donate it back. I love Bonnie's suggestion on that. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that is, yes, thank you for that. And I think I just want to acknowledge that like some of the lived experiences and expertise that are being provided at forums such as this, like $500 it's not even a drop in the bucket. And so like thinking about it as like a payment for services rendered is not exactly right. It's more an honoraria, but an honoraria also has like, it's an actual payment mechanism at the city that has like really discrete requirements around it. So we can't just call it an honoraria. So it's complicated. Corbin.
So with that said, I guess my question is, are there limits based on income? So the more wealthier of us might be able to opt out, or stipends won't be offered after a certain income amount. I think something like that should be in place. But I think also thinking about honoraria, what would it be to provide certificates to these community members with the city acknowledging the work that they have actually done to bring something to bear? That type of knowledge may go far for some community members, especially if they choose not to go for a fungible compensation versus acknowledgement of their engagement with city government in various ways.
Thank you. Yeah, as of right now, we have not considered, actually, I don't think we've heard so far feedback around that income threshold, that a specific threshold might be advisable. I think it's probably not lost on this group that like it's a difficult thing to parse out because lived experiences and expertises like they range income levels, and so like it could be complex and more important. I don't want to say more importantly, but I think another consideration is staff time administering. So like the challenges that come with that. So what I can do though, is I can, as we're moving forward with additional stakeholder interviews and digging into this, I can look for examples of where those kinds of limits have been put into place and what the feedback has been around that, or whether there are examples of that. Yeah, anything. I saw you come off mute, so.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. The certificate, I think, is a great idea, and we can note that as feedback that we've received. All right. Anything else? I'm doing a bad job of watching my time. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's a good conversation. We may have to start and then table the next agenda item. And any other comments, questions from Melissa on the stipend?
Thanks, Kenya. I will note, so just to kind of clarify the next steps, it won't be immediately that you're going to receive that follow-up email with those drafts for feedback, but they will come soon. It's just the cadence of your meeting didn't quite work out with the timeline. So in a couple weeks, probably you'll see some drafts come through.
Thank you for providing that information and for accepting our feedback, Melissa. Appreciate that.
Thank you. It's good to see you all. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Melissa. And with that, it is 6:45. I wanted to see if anybody had signed in to provide public comment. I don't see anybody's names that I don't recognize, but I wanted to leave a little space just in case. If not, we're going to start a discussion. Corbin's going to lead a discussion on board roles and how items come to the full board. We may only be able to start this discussion and then we can table it to the next meeting if we get to a good break point. How does that sound?
That works for me. And I'll say this, I don't think I'm going to lead a discussion based on the time, but I think having space for board members to ask any questions based on the materials that were provided for the meeting might be a good start.
That sounds great. I hope everybody had a chance to look at that. It was sent out after the main board packet as a separate standalone shorter little document if you had a chance to look at it. Maybe while people are thinking about what they reviewed, Corbin, do you want to give a quick, high level, 2-minute overview of what the discussion was and what you hope the more detailed discussion will incorporate?
Absolutely. And I think what Director Long put together for I believe it's the November 4th document, in which, really trying to understand how what should come before the board, what are the actions of duty of the board, at what level should the board engage in parks and recreation processes, and at what stage, and then also thinking through our actions as board members. I have been on the board for maybe 1.5 years, and unfortunately, I think the sole thing that we have been voting on has been the meeting minutes from the prior meeting. And some of the tensions that I'm seeing might be coming between staff and the board. Not to say it's a contentious relationship. I don't want to put that out there. But we are positioned to listen to informational reports, and we're not quite sure how to react to them. And a lot of times these reports come to us fully fledged, already engaged, already implemented. And when we have questions, unfortunately, it puts us in a position where we are questioning staff folks, and they don't have any recourse to fold in that feedback and move forward with it anyway. And so trying to really look through what the process can be for board members. Should we be situated as a vetting process for certain projects or procedures or things of that nature? So I would like to change some of the dynamic around how we engage material and issues at the board. And I'm hoping that this is starting off a longer conversation about what we actually do and what we're going to be known as moving forward. So I'll leave it there.
So I don't know if this is too deep of a question or not, because it's actually both to Director Long and Dr. Corbin. We just had a very nice presentation about stipend. That has not been fully developed. It is something that is still going through the process where they reached out to the board for comment. And I'm wondering if this is the kind of thing that Director Long, you're envisioning is to bring to the board. And if this is the kind of thing, Dr. Corman, that you're thinking that we should be commenting on.
For my part, yes, I think it's what I was envisioning. And it could vary whether it's around an SOP or a project or a survey or an initiative. Like there's so many different outputs that we do and have. But what I envisioned was creating a template so that we could be clear on what type of item would be reviewed at what level, because I think that there's still there's that valuable working group forum that I don't want to discount. So like not everything needs to come to the full board all of the time. And so I wanted to create a template based on sort of the narrative guidelines that I put in that document. To help us sort of guide what that looks like. And the other piece was, my intent or my hope was that I would work with the division managers and other key staff to look at their work plans and identify, because we know what folks are working on for the year. I mean, certainly some things come up right here and there, but by and large, we know what the large projects are for the year. And so we could go through the work plans and identify those in advance and actually almost create a calendar. So that was sort of how I was thinking about approaching it, so that it was somewhat, so there's a bit of a system in place, which of course, we always have to be flexible, but that was my thought. And I didn't get quite to the template piece. I just got to the sort of articulating what was in my brain into words. And I hope that it was, folks were able to follow. And Corbin and I just sort of emailed back and forth, and she, I sort of got a thumbs up that it was at least enough for a jumping off point for discussion. So I don't know, Corbin, if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think what I envision in this process is making sure that part of our board duty is, I'm going to read from what we have, provide a forum for public discussion, decision making, Portland Parks and Recreation issues. So I see this as a way of creating transparency. If we had community comments, we would fold that in. And so how I would envision what we just went through is for us to vote to approve the process that was just laid before us, with the understanding of folding in the feedback and comments that we just went through. So we are actually supporting the work that park staff is doing versus just listening and asking questions. So it's action oriented, it is transparent, it provides that opportunity for community members to engage, whether through comment or questions. And I think it's moving towards a more equitable, democratic way of thinking through community participation in Parks and Rec.
Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I think it might be helpful for the board is if y'all at PPR who deal with the various committees and the board as a whole were to maybe think about what the board or the committees have actually influenced. Because after being, on the board, I'm, ex officio, obviously, I don't vote. It's hard to see the measure of that. And maybe I'm just not, seeing it in the feedback loop. Because there isn't a vote, there isn't, there isn't the power to vote on anything or to vote against anything. So the sort of clarity of the influence of the board on PPR's policies, I think it would be great to just sort of understand how you all are receiving it and what meaningful change it caused, in your operations and your policies. So just a thought. I think Corbin raises some interesting questions, and I think it takes a while for folks to sort of understand exactly what the role of the board is. But I think that would be a very useful exercise for everybody.
Yeah, appreciate that, Randy. I think one of the things that I was thinking was that we would track that an item was, either that the board has provided input or feedback, or I use the word acknowledge, review, or validate items, because in many cases there is no vote, right? But to at least acknowledge that the board reviewed it and had the opportunity to provide input. And certainly we can add something to that template that shows that incorporates the feedback loops, and so that we're documenting it, other than the minutes, right? I think the minutes are helpful, but they're burdensome to sort of to go through. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just actual measurable influence, measurable impact would be, something I think it would be a great exercise. So
but
anyway.
I think one thing that we have to really acknowledge is that our role of Parks and Recreation Board as board members is to advise. And at this point, we don't have any advisory roles other than listening and asking questions. And I think what we saw transpired in the last presentation, that we did have some sort of advisory capacity. And so thinking through the language of what the board is supposed to do, we need to find those ways for us to advise on these processes. And so my apologies, Paul, for jumping in.
No worries, Corbin. I want to first of all just express my appreciation for you essentially naming the elephant in the room that's always been here with this advisory body. And I really appreciate you wanting us to be more action-oriented and to help promote transparency. As I recall my 5+ years on the board, I think the most gratifying experience I've had has been through a working group. It was actually a subgroup that Bonnie and I were on with Patty Tillett, which is the level of service. And just, there we actually had conversations and helped, I think, form some changes in how Parks is doing some of that work. But like you pointed out well, typically we just vote on our minutes, and that's not having much of an impact in terms of helping out the community or changing policy. So I think this is going to be a challenging conversation because there's a lot of nuance to this, but it is an appropriate conversation. And I think we can come out the other side feeling like we've really moved the needle So thank you for opening the door to that conversation.
Totally agree. I also, I want to acknowledge that as well. I also want to point out, though, that at any point, I can't make a motion to the floor, but any board member can. So in theory, there could be more things where we have discussion about taking actual positions on things. But we don't. We sort of tend to sit back and then we take positions when there is a specific either request or, there's some kind of opportunity to provide testimony. And those sorts of situations, but I really appreciate this discussion. And I think we will provide hopefully ample opportunity to have a meaningful discussion on this at the next meeting. So I'd like folks to please kind of consider the kind of, it's not exactly a white paper, but a sort of a discussion start that was sent out so that we can have a meaningful discussion on this topic. Anything else before I close it out? Just, I'm 1 minute early, but I felt like I could either cut it now because it seems like a natural break point, or we would probably go over. Any closing comments from you, Carmen?
I'm just very glad that we're broaching this subject and I look forward to the discussion as we move forward.
Great. Thank you. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn 1 minute early. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. All right.